If you take all the DNA out of every cell in your body and you stretch it end to end, it would reach from here to the moon and back thousands of times. It's a lot of information. And so when you're copying this DNA molecule to pass it on, it's a pretty tough job. Imagine the longest book you can think of, War and Peace, and now multiply it by 100. And imagine copying that by hand. And you're working away until late at night, and you're very, very careful, and you're drinking coffee, and you're paying attention, but occasionally, when you're copying this by hand, you're gonna make a little typo, a spelling mistake. Substitute an I for an E, or a C for a T. Same thing happens to our DNA as it's being passed on through the generations. It doesn't happen very often. We have a proofreading mechanism built in. But when it does happen, and these changes get transmitted down through the generations, they become markers of descent. If you share a marker with someone, it means you share an ancestor at some point in the past, the person who first had that change in their DNA. And it's by looking at the pattern of genetic variation, the pattern of these markers in people all over the world, and assessing the relative ages when they occurred throughout our history, that we've been able to construct a family tree for everybody alive today. These are two pieces of DNA that we use quite widely in our work. Mitochondrial DNA tracing a purely maternal line of descent. You get your mtDNA from your mother and your mother's mother, all the way back to the very first woman. The Y chromosome, the piece of DNA that makes men men, traces a purely paternal line of descent. Everybody in this room, everybody in the world, falls into a lineage somewhere on these trees. Now, even though these are simplified versions of the real trees, they're still kind of complicated, so let's simplify them, turn them on their sides, combine them so that they look like a tree with the root at the bottom and the branches going up. What's the take-home message? Well, the thing that jumps out at you first is that the deepest lineages in our family trees are found within Africa, among Africans. That means that Africans have been accumulating this mutational diversity for longer. And what that means is that we originated in Africa. It's written in our DNA. Every piece of DNA we look at has greater diversity within Africa than outside of Africa. And at some point in the past, a subgroup of Africans left the African continent to go out and populate the rest of the world. Now, how recently do we share this ancestry? Was it millions of years ago? Which we might suspect by looking at all this incredible variation around the world. No, the DNA tells a story that's very clear. Within the last 200,000 years, we all share an ancestor, a single person, mitochondrial Eve, you might have heard about her, in Africa, an African woman who gave rise to all the mitochondrial diversity in the world today. But what's even more amazing is that if you look at the Y chromosome side, the male side of the story, the Y chromosome Adam only lived around 60,000 years ago. That's only about 2,000 human generations, the blink of an eye in an evolutionary sense. That tells us we were all still living in Africa at that time. This was an African man who gave rise to all the Y chromosome diversity around the world. It's only within the last 60,000 years that we have started to generate this incredible diversity we see around the world. Such an amazing story. We're all effectively part of an extended African family.